Sì.
Me li deve tradurre in italiano?
No, questa è la prima domanda che ti ho fatto. Quando tu parli,
Ok,
ecco, tu dirlo in italiano che nel video compare già
ok,
la traduzione.
che riguarda i mercati sullo
Sì,
spazio.
sì,
Ok,
sì, ma metti
allora
il video.
io penso di. Ok, io penso di sì, esistono tre livelli di razzismo istituzionale e su di questa. Il primo è il voto, i governi locali usano i voti per favorire gli italiani e discriminare gli stranieri. E lo Stato si trasforma in uno strumento per la costruzione del consenso politico e soprattutto in tempi di crisi e incertezza sociale. Secondo l'identità etnica, i governi locali usano l'identità etnica per creare distanza tra gli italiani e gli stranieri. Molte volte mi stanno detto di rappresentare delle istituzioni, prima italiani, poi voi, gli stranieri. La qualità delle merci che vendiamo o il fatto che paghiamo tutte le tasse non ha alcuna importanza per proteggere i nostri diritti al lavoro. E infine il ruolo dei sindacalisti informali. I governi locali sono razzisti perché sanno che privare gli stranieri della bancarella del mercato non elimina i problemi, ma crea due alternative. O lavori senza licenze o sei costretto a dipendere dai sindicalisti informali per avere un nuovo banco assegnato. E purtroppo è così. Brigida.
Sì. And so let's go to the second question. While I was at the market with you, we realized that there is a paradox in marketplaces. There is such a richness of work experiences and knowledge, but this doesn't turn into new forms of collective and political empowerment. For sure, the marketplace gives you individual empowerment. When you decided to work at the market in Sicily, you studied the Sicilian law on trading in public places, and you know it better than any other Italian colleagues. And you use your knowledge to defend yourself and your work, often alone, in a stubborn way, even provoking and challenging institutions and informal trade unionists. But you know that it's not enough because you search as vice president of Senegalese Association in Catania, you search for collaboration with local union, with Confcommercio, there is a confederation of traders working in cooperation with the local chamber of commerce, and sometimes with Italian activists and other ethnic communities. So can you give us some example of the way of how you have experienced racism in this relationship? È la seconda domanda.
Ma sai, all'interno del sindacato il colore della pelle è più importante da ciò che pensiamo o sappiamo. Devi partecipare alle manifestazioni perché sei nero, scusami, sei di colore, nel senso stranieri per fare i numeri, ma chi partecipa alla manifestazione non sa nemmeno perché lo fa, non conosce la legge italiana e al sindacato non importa sul lavoro, la formazione, quanto sono stati inviati a fare parte del comitato. Quanto mi hanno invitato a fare parte del comitato dei diritti, Aida vieni, ma devi stare zitta. Io ho risposto no, non l'accetto perché devo stare zitta, no. Non, e poi non mi hanno più chiamato e questo è il sistema, scusami, che fanno alcuni sindacati. E con la Confcommercio, come associazione di comunità, abbiamo proposto la formazione la formazione di un patronato multietnico, un centro di assistenza, protezione e formazione dei lavori stranieri sarebbe stata un'esperienza pilota in Italia per due motivi: per regolare i mercati e spingere le persone a pagare le tasse e lavorare come commercianti regolari di mercati, ma anche formazione di imprenditori italiani che volevano investire in agricoltura anche nei paesi dell'Africa occidentale. Abbiamo fatto tutti i passaggi burocratici, abbiamo trovato anche il posto per il centro, ma alla fine la Confcommercio ha detto che non era possibile di aprire il centro, non hanno accettato di dare spazio ai commercianti stranieri all'interno dell'organizzazione, ma poi ho scoperto che hanno aperto i loro centri per formare nuovi operatori del mercato italiano. E come attivista locale penso che questa sia una forma non intenzionale di razzismo, ma è anche razzismo e impedisci di collaborare. E se ti dico che il console perché è imposto da 20 anni, ma non hai presti attenzione, sei razzista perché non riconosci che anche non abbiamo il diritto di scegliere chi ci rappresenta nella società locale, piuttosto che avere qualcuno imposto attraverso l'inganno organizzato della società benestrante locale con le altre comunità straniere. Non penso si tratta di razzismo, e spesso gli interessi personali diventano più forti del bisogno collettivo, questo è il problema.
And so, Aida, what happened at the market between me and you? Even if we find ourselves open-minded, I think that we both fought with our stereotypes as well. At the beginning, we were a Black woman and a white woman, a Muslim and a non-practicing Catholic. To be honest, it was Ndike who convinced you to work with me. For you, I realized while I was at the market there, I was more than a white woman, I was an European woman. And for me, before coming to the market, many people, I was told, you can't approach Senegalese women. They live in their very closed world. So working together, our relationship became friendship and complicity. Differences disappeared when we realized that we had something in common, a stubborn, action-oriented commitment to justice. And this was stronger than any difference. I remember a moment at the beginning of the research, it was almost 20 days that I was working with you. You used to introduce me at colleagues and at clients as your work assistant. I asked you, Aida, I'm a little bit worried. I don't know if it's correct that you don't say that I am a researcher, because I have to respect all the ethical issues related to research. And you replied, annoyed, Brigida, I don't care about your ethical stuff. I care about my community. So I will say that you are a researcher when I realize that they accept you as a human being. I didn't say anything because I thought that you were completely right. I did totally agree with you. We were human beings before being a researcher and a market trader. And I didn't say anything, and I just thought, okay, Aida, do what you want with the research, guide it, and let's see where it takes us. And I think that this was the moment that we changed. We were a market trader and a researcher, and we became co-inquirers, and this changed completely our relationship. And so, you, Aida, can you remember one or two moments that show how our relationship changed?
Allora, ricordo la prima sera al mercato di Noto Era la prima volta che dormivamo in macchina. Ti avevo detto tante volte di trovarti una stanza in un B&B, ma hai deciso di dormire nella mia macchina. Faceva freddo e ti ho dato la mia coperta e tu l'hai presa e hai dormito. Penso di averti inconsciamente messo alla prova. A ogni modo, quando hai preso la mia coperta e hai dormito in macchina, ho capito che potevo davvero fidarmi di te. Ma ci sono altri momenti, ad esempio a Gela, dove ho litigato con il sindacalista informale per un problema nell'assegnazione dei banchi. Era una situazione molto difficile, ma proprio in quella situazione difficile, sapendo che eri ormai familiare con il senegalese, ho deciso che dovevo dire chi eri, che eri ricercatrice. E anche agli italiani era la prima volta, ho urlato, guardate che abbiamo una ricercatrice e lei racconterà tutto ciò che vede. Tutti dovevano sapere che noi commercianti senegalesi non avevamo nulla da nascondere. Tu hai conosciuto la verità dei mercati in Sicilia e tu eri con me.
Okay, Aida, so let's conclude with a final question. What do you think is going to happen in marketplaces after the post-pandemic? How do you see your future as market trader?
Allora, Brigida, questa è una domanda molto difficile. Dopo la pandemia ci sarà disordine, non ci saranno diritti per i commercianti dei mercati estero, molti regolamenti informali sostituiranno la legge. Il mio lavoro al mercato non ha futuro. Non vedo alcun futuro per me al mercato. Questo non significa che non credo nel cambiamento sociale e politica, ma non posso farla da solo e non credo che arriverà dei governi locali. Questo non lo credo. Ho fatto questo lavoro con voi perché penso che il nostro modo di fare ricerca è un piccolo passo per cambiare i mercati, che non sono un problema siciliano o italiano. I mercati sono un problema di democrazia del lavoro in tutto il mondo.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brigida.
Thank you.
And Aida. And we will probably hear from them briefly shortly when we get to some questions. I will remind people, since we got a slightly late start, actually not too late because Antonio got on. I do think probably the time change, daylight saving in the United States probably caused the confusion. We thought we had taken care of that, but we may not have. So sorry, thanks for your patience. We actually didn't start much later than we wanted, but still, I appreciate everyone hanging in there. We changed the order a little, but now, and again, when our third and final presenter is done, he's with us now, Abraham Mwaura. We'll begin in a moment. When Abraham is done, we will go to questions and answers and comments. I will just remind people again, for some who can't stay on a lot longer, we will follow up with you. We see who's on. We'll keep your emails. We'll let you know about or remind you about our next teach-in. It will be more difficult for people overseas. It will be Thursday evening, April 29th. But we want to let you know that will be close to International Workers' Day, and we're going to focus on workers, especially low-wage workers and workers of color, being hurt and killed at work in the United States and other places. We'll probably focus a little more on the United States and just how horrific that is, and how COVID has only added one more danger that we live with every day. Now we're going to go with a friend of mine whom I met, and we used to work together on similar issues here in Chicago. He now lives in Geneva, Switzerland. He's a consultant with the World Health Organization on community issues. Has a little baby daughter. So I respect him joining us, because if you've had kids, you sleep not a whole lot when you work full time and have a little baby. Hopefully she's doing terrific. We're very lucky to have this great gentleman with us today, who's going to talk a little bit about racism in the United States and Europe, and also a little bit about how concerning the rise in infiltration by white supremacist groups in US law enforcement and the military. And also to be in the military then, how that, with the white supremacist forces expanding within the military, how that has and could continue to impact other countries where we have a military presence. So thank you very much for coming to us today, Abraham, from Geneva, Switzerland. You have the floor.
Thank you, Leonie. I didn't realize I was late. I thought I was precisely on time, so apologies to everyone. I approached Leonie about my concerns about white supremacist infiltration of the police many months ago now, and I will say that a lot has changed in that short time, and that there's a lot more visibility being given to this issue than there was at the time. But you know, Leonie had warned or requested the speakers not to be too academic in our approach to the discussion today, and but I find that it's very difficult to talk about modern day white supremacy without talking a little bit about history, without talking about its history, where it came from. It's not. We shouldn't assume that this is a normal way of, you know, humanity has interacted. In fact, it's actually quite recent. And so I have a few pieces of history that I want to touch on. I won't go too far back, but I will start by referring to the transatlantic slave trade as a kind of basis for the invention, I would say, of race. And one of the kind of it required an economic and logistical is really what I want to say. It required a logistical invention before race, the ideological or the you know, psychological invention took place, and that is long distance shipping. And Europe had just come, this is in the, well, for a long time, but 1500s, and by early 1600s, Europe was just coming out of a warring period between each other. For a long time, if you can imagine, European powers could only conquer each other. There was no conquering of the whole world, because again, the logistical basis of that hadn't been invented yet, and it was long distance shipping. And so at some point in the 1600s or late 1500s, early 1600s, while the European powers are basically creating what we understand today to be the nation state, right? So taking what has kind of for all of humanity has been a basis of our organization into tribes or into nations or into linguistic groups, and adding a governance structure that made hard borders, for example. None of this existed, right? Before the European power. This is the Peace of Westphalia, and that this essentially allowed European powers to create what we today understand to be countries, nation states. But around that same time was the invention of shipping, as I said. And so one of the discoveries that was that I wanted to, so this is one of the historical pieces of evidence I wanted to put forward, is it's around this time that they then discover what was called at the time the Dark Continent. It was dark not because there wasn't electricity, there was no electricity anywhere. It was dark because of the color of the people's skin. And the Dark Continent is Africa. And it wasn't the first time Europe had interacted with Africans. Actually, if you go back as far as the Roman Empire 2,000 years ago, there's actually very famous black generals, right? And actually, if you look at the map of the Roman Empire spread into Northern Africa. It was very much, Europe and Africa were very much intertwined. I would say in part because civilization, the major civilization at the time was Kemet or modern day Egypt, and even further south, Nubia, which is in modern day Sudan. But if you look at that Roman Empire, right, the Roman Empire spread through Western Europe into the Middle East and south into Northern Africa. So Europe and Africa had been, there'd been interactions for a long, long time. But there's a rediscovery of Africa in the 1600s, late 1500s, early 1600s. And they call it the Dark Continent. And okay, so now the little tidbit of history. They discover, there's a discovery of what were kind of inexplicable creatures. And I'm not using that word accidentally, right? They discover chimpanzees and orangutans and all sorts of creatures that this was really the first time that Europe in that era had interacted with. They also discovered another creature, Black people. And there was a major debate about how to sort through these discoveries in order to figure out which of these creatures could be Christianized. And this is, when I learned about this is pretty shocking to me, right? To kind of have this very reductionist take on other human beings. But I must say it feels right. It feels like what today white supremacy feels like. So that's the first piece of tidbit of history that I wanted to refer to in terms of white supremacy. I'll tell you another little story. It's much more modern, but it has old references as well. And on January 6th, so these are some of the events that have taken place since I started talking to Leone about white supremacy. January 6th, 2021, now infamous senator got up in front of the Senate to argue, basically to not exactly throw out the votes of particular states. In this case, it was Arizona. Instead, what he was offering was, quote unquote, a third option. He said, and for that, I look to the precedent of the 1876 election. The 1876 election is really important, obviously. It's the only other time when there was a constitutional crisis in the US over the presidency. And it is important that Ted Cruz would refer to it as precedent setting, because it is the one time in American history, in the history of any democracy anywhere, that an election was not overturned, but really turned around basically for the sake of keeping the peace. And so there was an arrangement that was reached at in 1876. This is soon after slavery has been, quote unquote, abolished, and I'll come back to why I'm putting quotes around that. And basically the northern troops, the Union troops from the northern United States had been sent to the South, basically as peacekeepers. They were there in much the same form that U.S. troops, or in much the same, to fulfill the same role that U.S. troops fulfilled in Europe after World War II. They were there as peacekeepers. So basically to make sure people are minding themselves a little bit, but also to get involved in reconstruction. And reconstruction in the South is a complex and controversial topic for another day. But let's just say that they were honestly there to try to rebuild the South. And in particular, because there was this large number of formerly enslaved people in the South, they somehow needed to be, quote unquote, integrated into society, into modern day the United States of that era. And this period of time, this period of Reconstruction, is actually has the largest number of Black people not only registering to vote, but actually winning elections and becoming parts of legislature, members of legislatures in the United States. Still has never really been reached again because of this agreement in 1876, that essentially says, there's claims of election fraud, very similar to 2020, and the winner of the election has to basically hand over the power to the Republican, with the guarantee that the Republican and the Republicans of that era were truly Lincoln Republicans, right? So these were the folks who were against slavery, but they have to guarantee that they will remove Union troops from the South. And this begins a process that essentially leads to the re-disenfranchisement of Black people in US democracy. I'm sorry, I'm using a lot of air quotes for things that it's to give a sense of skepticism. There's a reason I bring this up, because of course, half an hour after Ted Cruz has given this speech, right, there's a mob that storms the Capitol, and everyone knows about it. It was on TV all over the world, and in fact, there's these guys who are quoted while they're rifling through the desk of one of the legislators saying something like, Ted Cruz would be proud of us, or Ted Cruz would be happy with what they were finding on this person's desk. But the reason I bring this up is because we too often think of white supremacy as these hooded, white-cloaked KKK members, or as a mob invading the Capitol, and we don't often enough think about the economic and the policy foundations of white supremacy, and that actually the two things go together. As I mentioned, it's been a few months since I brought this up with Leone, right? But in 2006, there's a now famous FBI report that was released that, quote, identified white supremacists in law enforcement as a concern because of their access to both restricted areas vulnerable to sabotage, for example, the United States Capitol, and the memo also warned of, quote, ghost skins, hate group members who don't overtly display their beliefs in order to blend into society and covertly advance white supremacist causes. Also in 2020, there was a testimony given to the US House Armed Service Committee on, quote, alarming incidents of white supremacy in the military. And in fact, during that testimony, this is from the Southern Poverty Law Center. During that testimony, she referred to a US Army veteran who, in his book in 2012, he's still an active white supremacist today, White Aryan Resistance War member and leader, said that he estimated that as many as 10% of the Army and Marines are racist extremists of some variety. I would encourage them, I'm continuing quoting him, I would encourage them to join the military if they had a scratch they can't itch, he said he would say to his followers. Then go in to bring some training back to the US and make the federal government aware of our existence. That's, again, a leader from the white Aryan resistance. So around the time I was talking to Leone about this, I asked a friend of mine to, an Italian, and I love that I'm on a panel with two very talented and thoughtful Italians. I asked an Italian friend of mine whether he could kind of help me, because I was very concerned about this. And I asked him whether he could help me figure out what the tipping points were, or what some of the dots were that, that kind of allowed the Nazis to successfully come to power. I mean, basically, I was hoping it was not too late, right? And I would say I still hope it's not too late now. And he specifically referred me to a book on economics, which this is really the point I want to drive home today, because I don't have much time, so I'm going to end very quickly, that he referred me to a book on economics. And sorry if I had actually just pulled it up and then I put it back down, but just a second. The Wages of Destruction, the Making and Breaking of the Nazi Economy. And I mean, essentially the basis, this writer's interpretation of how the Nazis came to power is partially the story we all know very well, right? Germany loses World War I. There's a lot of bitterness. There is no reconstruction, and basically Hitler has some extremist ideology, but even him, you can kind of see like he's developing his extremist ideology. He didn't just start out his political career as a Nazi, right? Like, or as a Nazi that we understand today, right? He worked toward it. He became more and more extreme in his ideology. But the economics is clear. This is what is astounding to me, right? Germany was no longer the center of the economic world. I mean, you think about Germany is a huge country in Europe. It is the biggest economy in Europe, right? And at the time, this was incomparable anywhere else in the world, right? They, at the end of World War I, they basically have to give up some of their colonies in essentially as UN protectorates. The UN then turns around and gives them to the UK or the British Empire at the time to, again, protect them, to hold them on behalf of the UN. But Germany was losing its stature, right? And the United States of America was rising in stature. I just want to say that this is eerily familiar to today. The United States is losing its stature as an economic power. In fact, there are people now who predict that the Chinese economy has already overtaken the US economy. That doesn't mean, and I would say that much of Chinese behavior in Africa, again, today, is very much imperial in its character. I want to end with one quick thing. Today, there are still auction blocks for slaves. In fact, the ILO estimates that there are today 3 times more people sold into slavery as the whole 350-year era of the transatlantic slave trade. I get chills just having to articulate that. I mean, this is not an easy fact to stomach. But I wanted to leave you with a question. How many of you can guess what the going rate is for a slave? If you went to one of these auctions, how much would you guess you would have to pay? There's a number. It's fairly well known. The ILO knows it. International Organization of Migration knows it. CNN knows it. You can put it in the chat. Oh, you can't put it in the chat. Maybe people can't put it in the chat. It's $400. $400 today, and you can buy another human being. This is an incredible, yeah, I don't know, irony of living in the modern era, when we think that this particular feature of white supremacy is something in our past, right? We talk about it with such shame, right? And white people feel very guilt. I mean, there's a lot of guilt attached to this, right? I mean, you'll hear it even among white supremacists, right? Who will say they themselves were not the slave owners, right? That this is something in their past. You can't judge them for something in their past. This is why I wanted to make it really clear today in my very, very short time, and I think I've already spoken about the time I was supposed to anyway, that white supremacy is a political experiment, but it's not an experiment anymore. It's a political work, right? It has policy implications. It has its basis in the economy specifically. This is the point. So when we see these kinds of facts, right? So like the 2006 report from the FBI, that the FBI is calling out as a critical, critically important and dangerous, right? That there are white supremacists who are deliberately infiltrating the police. And then we see mass killings, modern day lynchings of Black people, of Native people, I don't even know what to call it, but the rounding up of I'll just say what the media calls it, the separation of children from their parents at the border, which look like camps. They did it so fast, in fact, that there were cases where they had to just put wire in the underpasses, under bridges, to be able to keep these children in temporarily before they could actually find more permanent spaces for them, right? These images and the ones now in Libya on these auction blocks that are very, very much the same, detention centers in Libya that become basically pathways to the modern day auction block, these have an economic basis, right? And a policy basis. And when, again, so it's infiltration of the police and infiltration of the military, there's a reason behind it. And I would say it has the same basis as you see during the rise of Nazism in Germany, right? It is a last ditch, a kind of clutching at straw effort of an empire that is beginning to fall. And I think we shouldn't just lightly, anyway, I think I've made my point. I wanted to leave you with that $400. I've maybe talked too much afterwards. Yes. Yeah.
You did not talk too much. I always say that one of the difficult things with our racial justice teach-ins and anyone's and racial unity dialogues, and I mentioned this early on when we were waiting for the panelists to come in, we kind of talked a little bit. I had a few comments, and I said what I say at every teach-in and dialogue, and I mean this from the heart, that on the participant list, I can always recognize a certain amount of people. Today, a little less than normal, which is really cool. Normally, I can recognize 2/3, maybe half. And I've heard of some others. And even some of you from Europe, I saw your names and emails. And don't worry, I didn't do any background checks on anyone. But I did ask some of the panelists, and I Googled your names. And I know that many of you that I know on this call and I don't know on this call, and I won't start naming because that'll take the rest of our time, but you are incredible activists on your own. So I always remind people, this is not like the traditional class where 5 or 6 experts say really cool things and the rest of you learn. I think it's more like any of you 5 or 6 could do this panel. Any one of you could probably do this whole discussion. And so we appreciate that you've joined us. I look at it like a collective effort where you're supporting. Maybe you'll learn something or think of something, but also we appreciate your support. And then we stay in touch, and and figure out how to work you in other dialogues. So if you are not able to have a question or comment today, we don't have a lot more time. We are willing to go a little past the original 12 p.m. Chicago time. But I've learned that we shouldn't go too far past it because many of you also have other things to do. But I just want to say before we go into a couple of questions and comments that I do recognize that many of you on this call are like incredibly respected activists on racism, police issues, immigrants and everything. So thank you very much for supporting us. We're going to go with one question and one comment, and I'm going to ask each panelist not to comment on both, but maybe find a way to have each of the panelists maybe either the question or the comment. Then we'll see how we're doing with time, because I want to give the panelists a chance to have a brief closing. And I'll work in one quick comment coming out of the three presentations. I've been organizing workers for 32, 33 years full-time in the farm worker movement on the West Coast, poultry and meat packing in the mid. So for those of you as less familiar with the US, but in the Southeast, so Arkansas, North Carolina, Georgia, and also in Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, Oklahoma, also with janitors and also with temporary labor workers here in Chicago. And now I've been living in Chicago about 20 years. And I've been working in Chicago about 12, almost 13 years. And I will just say that in my experience and the experience of others here at Working Family Solidarity, far and away, not the only, but the most decisive factor in dividing workers in any campaign I have ever been a part of has been race. It doesn't mean there's not other important ones, right? I never want to discount gender, sexual orientation, and many, many other disabilities, age. Those are very important factors. I'm just sharing my personal experience is nothing has worked as well in the poultry processing factories, in the hog farms, in the janitors in Chicago and other Midwest cities, in the temporary labor, in manufacturing, in construction. Nothing, in my opinion, in my experience, has ever worked as well as dividing workers along racial lines every time they attempt to organize around anything. And so we really feel like capitalism has perfected racism, a little bit like Abraham was talking about. So sure, there was always some racial, hey, our group is different from your group, so we're kind of not sure about your group. We're a little suspicious. We don't know you. You always get the we, the them, our group, their group. Sure, a little bit of that. But if you go back, and I'm going to leave it here for now, and I know a lot of you are experts on this, but we just want to share our opinion at Working Family Solidarity. We really think that if you go back, if you want to say 100 years, 150, 160, when the Industrial Revolution really started ramping up in a way in the colonial effort earlier, then the definition of who is Black, who is brown, who is indigenous, who is white, who is not white. That's when it was not maybe invented, but that's when it was perfected. That's something that we feel is important. And that's why a lot of folks will say, well, are you a worker organizing organization or a racial justice organization? And what we tell them is you cannot do one without the other. You will fail. If you try to build racial justice without a worker justice, you will fail. If you try to have worker justice without racial justice, you will fail. That is our opinion. Asia, I think we had one early question from a person named Christian, perhaps?
Yes, I think that this question was for Aida and Brigida, and it was pertaining to their presentation. And they were just asking for clarification on what an informal unionist was. Or I guess who were you referring to when you said informal unionist?
So Brigida, let me say this quickly. So even if it takes a minute more, you can say whatever you want, Brigida. Aida can say whatever she wants. You can translate it just right on the screen. And it'll just take a minute more. And then the next question or comment, whatever it is, we will give Abraham and Antonio a
Aida.
chance to answer.
Accendi il microfono che c'è una domanda. Chiedono chi è che sono questi sindacalisti informali. Se tu gli rispondi io lo traduco. Non lo puoi?
Sì, allora, sì, mi dica.
Allora, Aida, se puoi spiegare che cosa sono quando tu parli di sindacalisti informali, che cosa vuoi dire?
E questi sono gruppi di sindacati che hanno il potere, che gestiscono quasi tutti i mercati e lo sappiamo tutti, quelli che vivono lì lo sanno.
So she is saying that these are unionists, they are informal unionists who create these groups of workers alternative at the unions. And so they have the power of the real management of trading in public places in Sicily and in Italy as well, because it's not a problem of Sicily. These are these informal trade unionists. They are throughout Italy. So it's not to say, it's somehow a sort of, this is something that I want to add. It's like a sort of mafia in at trading in public places. This is my point of view, but this is an informal way of management, and is strongly intertwining with local government. This is my point of view.
Well, we want your point of view, and Aida, grazie. We will do this next. Let's go to a comment. Asia, I want to say perhaps the second comment. We're going in the best order. Have patience with us. We may not get to everyone, but we will then try to figure out how to do another one of these soon, and maybe have more of a dialogue so that more people can speak. I want to say perhaps Salvatore had a comment that you can read, Asia, and then no matter who that's for, I may turn it over to Antonio and Abraham for a response.
Definitely. I also wanted to point out a comment that was shared a little bit earlier about Amnesty International and the reports that are available by Amnesty International. I did share the website in the chat, so if you're interested in kind of learning a little bit more about the information that they can offer on human rights, the website is in the chat, and they have a lot of information that can kind of tie in some of what our panelists were saying today. The next comment that I do have was for Aida and Brigida, and they said that the Aida and Brigida experience is an extraordinary success of friendly emancipation, but unfortunately many immigrants live in very basic conditions, aggressive conditions that are made aggressive by violent racists among Italians and among policemen.
Okay, I believe that was from Salvatore. Thank you. And here's what we're going to do. I want to ask a question in case some people, I know a few people had to leave earlier already, but some of you have done this, but we will keep a copy of the chat. If you are still here with us, I see a lot of people are, could you please write what country you are in right now? Just simply your name and just write the country. The panelists don't need to do this, but it's the first time, it's not the first time we've had people from other countries in our teach-ins and dialogues, but it's the first time we've had from so many places. And I would love to remember, I have your name and email, but that doesn't always tell me where you are. So if you could please just put, wherever you are, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to do this. We will make sure that Brigida and Aida both have a chance to speak again, at least once, maybe more. But I'm going to, because Salvatore's comment was broader than just, you know, hey, I have a question for your experience. He was kind of coming off of that, making a broader comment about these broader issues. Asia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm sorry because I took a moment. So just for Antonio and Abraham. Antonio, I'm going to have you say whatever you want about this, and then you, Abraham. And again, we'll circle back to you, Brigida and Aida, in a moment too. But I want to make sure everyone stays involved. Asia, can you please repeat Salvatore's comment for Antonio and then Abraham? Please.
Definitely. Let's see. So the Aida and Brigida experience is an extraordinary success of friendly emancipation, but unfortunately many immigrants live in very base conditions, aggressed by the violent racists among Italians and among the policemen.
Antonio, whatever you want to say, not necessarily a response, but just whatever that makes you think about.
Yes, I think that it's true, but we in Italian many activists knows that the situation is made by racism from politicians, and the problem is that it's normal to hear in TV or in public debate the racism became our daily experience. For me, it could be very interesting to learn something from United States experience, from United USA movements against anti-racism, and exchange our experience. I think that it could be very, very interesting for us. Learn something about your experience, your struggles, your aid to workers, and so on. I think it's we are experts about our lands, our experience, our cities, but we don't know anything about USA. In Italy, the USA movement is just a matter of politically correct, just a matter of language, and we don't know anything about your organization, your social movements. For me, it's very interesting to start with connect with you and with your experience.
Abraham, would you like to make a comment on that?
Well, I also agree with Salvatore's remark. I mean, I don't know the context of Italy, but I can speak a little bit about my experience in the U.S. And Leona, I hope you agree with this, that basically there's far more workers who are exploited and I mean, in very dire situations, I would say, than there are who, are in groups such as your organization, or organizations that you and I both know, or in a union for that matter. And what was interesting and particularly striking is and maybe it's kind of carried from the translation, but the use of the word emancipation is really interesting to me, because I think too often there isn't a sense that this, that the work of organizing workers leads to is meant to be liberatory in nature, not just about improving conditions. And to some degree, I think this needs to be, we need to go back to this this type of organizing where we really are trying to build a liberation movement, not just a movement for better wages and more rights under you know, under laws of governments that are kind of intuitively oppressive to workers, and are, you know, one of my previous jobs with the was with UE, as Leonie knows. That's where we met. And the UE has this, you know, kind of mantra that when they're training their organizers, that the interests of the boss and the interests of the workers are diametrically opposed. There's, you know, you as an organizer, you know, Brigida in her interactions, Antonio in his interactions, in attempting to liberate, or even as simply as bringing out the stories of oppressed people. This is opposite of what the bosses want, right? This is against their interests. You know, we used to illustrate it with the idea that there's only, you know, the pie is only so big, and so when workers are demanding a bigger piece of the pie, it means that the boss is getting a smaller piece of the pie. And anyway, I'll leave it at that. But I do agree that you know, the instance and story, you know, between Brigida and Aida is unique, and I would say it's unique in that it is liberatory. It is a story about emancipation, which I really like the use of that word. But it's, you know, but there are too few workers who are in organizations like, again, I'm repeating myself, but who even have that path as an option. Many, the vast majority of workers in the world, I would say, are in very oppressive conditions.
Thank you very much. I will just say a brief comment, Antonio, and I won't try to make it longer, or I never attempt to answer something because I'm not sure these are answerable in a few sentences. But just because you had talked about your interest, Antonio, in learning more about the U.S., which we can't finish today, but this is a good start, and we'll find more teach-ins soon. We will let you all know. And also find ways to we'll have to end fairly soon. We might go a few minutes after our original ending time, but we won't go much over. But I just want to say I have spent time, a few years, living in Europe and traveling some and in other countries, but specifically with Europe. Obviously, there's differences between European countries, so this is a generality. But one dynamic I have felt, again, I'm not stating this is the way it is, but in my experiences, and somewhat based on demographic statistics, in the US, we are almost half people of color now. That's not the situation in Europe. So it's neither better or worse. It's just there's horrific racism in Europe and there's horrific racism in the United States. But it's an interesting situation. Here in Chicago, for example, there has been for many years, you know, just African Americans and the Latinx community. Together, we were probably 2/3, almost 3/4 of the entire city, not county area, but city of Chicago. Tremendous power. And one of the reasons our organization, although we organize workers, one of the reasons we work to fight gentrification, to fight pushing out poor people from London, from Paris, from Chicago, right? Where we go into the city center and clean the rich people's toilets, and then we take an hour-and-a-half train all the way out, like London, to the immigrant communities where we live. Chicago's somewhat different. But over the years, one important way for the wealthy elite to sort of get more control again in the city of Chicago is by pushing out African Americans and Latinx people in legal ways. So they can't grab us out of our house, although they do this too, of course, but they can't quite militarily take us all and move us out to other counties. But they can raise the land value and the rents and all of that so that we're forced out. More than 200,000 African Americans, Antonio, have been forced out of Chicago in the last 15 years. In my neighborhood, where I live now with my wife and 2 kids. It used to be vast majority Latinos. Now there's still Latinos here, but at least 10,000 Latinx families have been pushed out of just my neighborhood in the last maybe 15 years or 10 years. So I won't go on a lot longer, but I think it's interesting to continue to hold these dialogues because in places in the US, like Minneapolis 15 years ago, they did not have a lot of racial strife because they had very few people of color. They certainly had people of color. But with the State Department designating that as an area where many Somali refugees went, many Hmong refugees went, many Mexican immigrants went to work, now you have a bigger population. There's always been racial tension there, don't get me wrong. But now all those liberal, progressive white folks, now they have to live next to black people and brown people, not just say they like us, right? Like you said, Antonio, not just politically correct. Oh, I know I shouldn't say black. I'll say African-American. Oh, I know I should say not Latino, Latinx. So they've learned all the words, but that doesn't mean they like us, right? Some like us, some don't like us. But in other places in the United States, like the South, you see what's happening in Georgia. There's a lot of black people there, and they just voted for a Democrat in 2 Senate races. And so without getting into the parties and all of that, now the Republicans are passing tremendous, crazy Jim Crow, just after slavery, right? Era laws to try to control people of color from voting. So I won't go on anymore, but I want to keep these dialogues going because we both have problems with racism. But it's interesting in areas where people of color are a big percentage of the population. I think it works differently than in areas where it's a small percentage of the population. Not that it's any better or worse anywhere, but it's just interesting to understand those dynamics. Here's what we're going to do. Thank you for your patience. We're going to give, it's just 12:01, so we want to end quite soon, but we want to give each of our panel presenters a chance to close with any comment that they want from today. Any last thing you want to say, a point, an answer, anything at all that you want to comment on. And then I'll close after that. Why don't we start, just so I'll help guide you here. Why don't we start first with Antonello?
You're on
You're
mute.
muted.
Yes. Can you hear me? Okay. Yes, I can repeat this, that for me it's just a start to this speak, because I think in our country, in Italy and in Europe, we speak a lot about the smuggling of immigrants in the Mediterranean Sea, and we not speak about visas, or we don't speak about the right of travel from Africa to Europe, for example. And it's a different approach, because if I speak just about salvation of people, I say that African people are poor people and I have to save them. But if I speak about the right of travel for people who have the right to search better opportunity in Europe, it's another point of view. And it is just an example. So I think it's very, very important to speak, to maintain the memory of African people killed in Italy. 30 years ago was killed Jerry Maslow. He was a South African refugee killed by mafia in Italy. And also Italian people, also young people doesn't remember these stories. And they think that Italian people are good people and there is not racism against immigrants. And the story is completely different. It's a story of murder people. It's a story of asylum seekers without rights. It's a story of racism from also from good people who ask just humanitarian aid. And I think it's very important, a confrontation with a lot of experience. And I think it's very important to see future. Future is future in Italy, I think, are the so-called second generation, are the son of immigrants. They are young people with roots in Italy, but with the past of father and mother in, for example, in Morocco and in Albania. And they are, I think, they are the future of our society. And thanks to Leone, thanks for this confrontation. I think it's very important to continue to exchange experience among us.
Thank you, Antonello, very, very much. And we will continue. I will be in touch with all the panelists and others, and we will find a way to continue these international dialogues. Absolutely. Next, why don't we go with Brigida and Aida, and then we'll go with Abraham at the end. So any comments, any final comments that you would like to make?
Allora, io vorrei soltanto ringraziare il signor Leone e tutti quelli che sono nel questo incontro e dire che dobbiamo continuare a crederci che un giorno arriveremo ai nostri obiettivi, perché siamo arrivati da un mondo che non ha più frontiere e dobbiamo tutti essere uniti.
Aspetta, Aida. So she says, she said that she is, già l'ho dimenticato quello che hai detto, aspetta. She said that, that we must go on believing that we can change. And because this is a world without frontiers, and we have to realize that this is a world without frontiers. Ora continua.
Ecco, avremo l'occasione neanche di fare altri incontri per portare la voce più alta.
And she thinks that it's good if we go on with these meetings and to give voice to other people as well.
E sempre di pensare perché la gente muoiono nel Mediterraneo. Dobbiamo sempre riflettere su perché muoiono su questo Mediterraneo. Perché se ne vanno.
And she says that we have to reflect why people die in the Mediterranean Sea. Why?
E io sono sempre disponibile a dare la mia esperienza. Basta che si può servire sempre a qualcosa. Vi ringrazio a tutti.
She is open to collaboration, and she thanks everybody.
Grazie, Esther. Mille grazie. Aida, Brigida, any thing you would like to say?
Well, I don't know. I think that I think that when I got in touch again with you, Leone, I started to think about. I was trying to get in touch again with Chicago, and being with you during the racial unity dialogues in the past, I was thinking about racism and the different ways in which racism play a role in different institutional contexts. And I remember when Abraham, in the past, he spoke about deprivation of land, deprivation of housing, and this is a sort of practices of racism. And in the case of Aida, it's not an extreme case, but it's something that we have to think that racism is a daily practice. It's not in Italy, it's something that it's becoming taken for granted. It's not only exploitation, violence, it's becoming practice. When Aida says, I was there, we are Italian, then you as strangers. This is not something that it's violent or not. This is changing our mind, and this is getting worse, the situation, and it's like saying if it's violence, well, that's normal because you are stranger, we are Italians, and I think that if we go on with these meetings, it's good to create a new exchange, a new form of international collaboration that can change the way we think about public policies and cultural diversity.
Thank you very much, Brigida. And Abraham, please.
I must say the other panelists have already said, kind of have really framed like very good concluding statements. So it's even I wish you had been first. Then they would have to respond to me. But I like the idea of racism or recognizing racism as a daily practice. This is an important insight, I think, for me. When I first moved to the States, I think I really understood colonialism. I grew up in Kenya. I would say I was already a radical, certainly from high school. And for me, colonialism was front and center. And I really saw colonialism as a daily practice, even in post-independence Kenya and post-independence just about anywhere, Africa and Asia and Latin America. It was like we had never really gained independence, but I didn't understand racism, and I didn't see how important a role racism played in what I was interpreting as kind of this continuation of colonialism. So I would say that there is space. The racism definitely it seems, even just from this discussion, racism really takes different tactics. It's a daily experience, but it's tactically different in different places. Maybe even it's tactically different in how any individual experiences it. Maybe we experience racism differently at work as we would in the street, as we do being followed around in the grocery store by the security, right? So tactically, it has all these different approaches, and definitely around the world, it tactically is different because I think, because it has these same roots, we can identify it in different places. So for example, I would say the case of untouchables in India is we need to be ready to define this as racism and a kind of supremacy that has its roots in the same thing, right? This kind of colonialism and an economy based on exploitation. That's one point. So kind of if my own understanding of racism can evolve from just purely being an understanding of colonialism to this, yes, everyday experience, then I believe we can collectively evolve our understanding of racism. That's one piece. And therefore, the second, I think we have to evolve our movements as well. That we've created massive organizations. We should be proud of the work we've done, right? We should embrace the fights that we've taken on and won for people. But there's still somewhere we need to go. We should not be satisfied with where we are now in terms of our movement building, in terms of the movements we've built. So, for example, I think that anti-human trafficking, immigrant rights, labor struggles, human rights, all of this can, again, while embracing what we've done and really acknowledging the victories we've had, we need to evolve this into a 21st century abolitionist movement. And to me, it's like, I don't know, I wish I wish I had a way of convincing people better, right? Because I think so often in the past when I've talked about slavery, even as modern day slavery, it's often hyperbole, or talking about a situation that is like slavery, not that truly in the modern day another human being can be owned. And I think we have to acknowledge that if this is a reality, then our movements need to evolve to be able to cope with it. So yeah, with the other speakers, I really thank you, Leone, for this platform and your organization and everyone in attendance and the very interesting reflections. I agree with you, Leone. It is a little awkward to be speaking to a group where that basically everyone is coming with a lot of their own experience and expertise, and yeah, so I look forward to like continuing this discussion and really figuring out how we reflect this ideal of the movement we need and turn it into action, turn it into reality. So thank you very much. I'm very happy to have been here with you all.
Thanks very, very much, Abraham. Thanks to all of the panelists, Antonio, Brigida, Aida, Abraham. Asia Anderson was our chat moderator. She had to actually get off to go to something. We greatly appreciate, again, the interpreting crew from Somos Sur. We are the South, Somos Sur. We had Eva Cardenas, still with us, and Crystal Zaragoza. Thank you so much. In closing, we focus at Working Family Solidarity on organizing workers at the workplace and beyond, primarily around property issues, primarily around equitable development, so that our gains as workers can mean something because we actually have a place to live. And one thing I like to remind even white workers, and unless you're extremely wealthy, even if you're white doing okay, you are a worker. You get up in the morning and you sell your labor to someone else. That may sound old-fashioned, but that's what runs this world. Think about how much we define ourselves. Where do you work? Who's your boss? Who's your supervisor? Oh, did you get a job? Right? And we need to analyze. We're not doing that today, but I urge you all to understand our political economy. And I urge workers who don't really think, yeah, racism is a problem, but whatever, we got to get together as workers. They don't see it as part of the worker struggle. In other words, they think there's a problem with racism. There's a problem with workers being exploited. Some of us believe they actually work together like a DNA strand, right? One doesn't function without the other. Not in 2021. It really doesn't. We urge you to think about, and we urge white workers especially who say, yeah, we need to be together, but this racism thing's exaggerated. We always like to remind them who wins when we're divided. And white workers will not have liberation as well, ironically, until they join with us. And we always tell white folks that we want you to be part of these dialogues. We don't want it to be people of color discussing, you know, how we were treated badly yesterday, although we do welcome that because we should talk about how we're treated every day. But we want white folks to know that whether they like it or not, except for the extreme wealthy, and most hate this fact, we are your natural allies. Go to bed with that. You may hate me as a Latino, I don't care. I am your natural ally unless you're an independently, extremely wealthy person. The same people who are stealing your daddy's farm in Western Illinois, that company is moving me and my family out of the Pilsen neighborhood in Chicago. Got it? So it's not whether we like it or not. And I hope you'll understand when I say it's not primarily about trying to be friends with people of different races. I'm just being real with you. I'd rather have an ally in the fight for worker justice than a friend, because friendship takes time. And I don't think we have a million years. It doesn't mean, I like to say it's beyond friendship. It's solidarity. It's not unity, it's solidarity. Solidarity is organized unity, right? So we're not just, hey, we're all together. We did a bunch of stuff. We did nothing. We did nothing. We got together and said we're all friends and we went home. We did nothing. No one is scared of us, right? It's when we start to organize, and I've seen this, and I know so many people on this call have seen this, right? You don't see the teeth come out and the violence come out until people of color and poor workers win something, right? You start to get, why were the Haymarket martyrs killed in Chicago, right? In the late 1800s, why? We'll leave out all the different reasons why. One thing to think about, you know, one thing they said when they were asked, you have to agree things are better now because a couple decades ago, the Civil War occurred and slaves were freed. And the Haymarket martyrs, before they were killed, obviously, said, we disagree. We think that in 1865, a battle ended about the kind of slavery we will have. And chattel slavery, the direct owning of a person, keeping them with the horses and cows, that was put down in favor of wage slavery, where the capitalists will pay us each enough to live one more day so we get up the next day and make them rich again. And then they were killed. And in other words, here were European and European American men, white, starting to talk about this open world where perhaps white workers, just like the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, right, after the Civil War, white sharecroppers, small farmers, and black small farmers came together, that was violently destroyed. Murder. I've been to places in the South where there's all kinds of plaques. So I simply want to remind folks, there's many examples throughout history when poor people across races come together, that's when we see the heightened, or when any particular racial group is very effective in fighting. But it's often when it becomes multiracial that the very most powerful people start to get afraid, because that's where we have the numbers, right? There's way more workers than there are owners. So again, let's work on cutting down this division, even as we figure out how to organize together as workers. Thank you so much for joining us. You saw our website, workingfamilysolidarity.org. You can email us on there. We'll make sure you stay on our list, and we will be reaching out to figure out how we can do this again soon. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Mille grazie, Aida, coming to us from Senegal, and we will continue to learn from each other. Thank you so much, and until soon, have a great day. Okay? Grazie, merci, thank you.
I see, bye-bye.